Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year. This special episode of Dive Talk. Special for a variety of reasons, by the way. Number one, it's our 1 year anniversary of the show.
No way.
Yeah.
High five.
High five.
Boom, loud.
That's right. 26 episodes.
I still like you.
Episode number,
After this close to
barely.
For 1 year.
Episode number 26, and the first one we record on the go, on a travel. So there's a lot of firsts.
I can't wait to tell them what my eyeballs are looking at right now. Besides the two good-looking guys that are amazing KISS cave divers across from me, what are we looking at right now? Should I tell them or you?
Well, we're in
Cozumel, Mexico.
We're in Cozumel. Yeah. Well, they already knew because you spilled the beans on the last episode. They knew we were gonna be here.
Okay.
Yeah. But today's episode is special because we have Doug back on the show. Doug, say hi.
That's Doug Ebersole.
There you go.
See you guys again.
Ebersole, yeah. And for the first time, Bryan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Always good to see you,
Lives in
too.
High Springs, Florida. Moved there just for cave diving.
That's right.
And I will have to give him a special thanks for very much helping me configure my Sidewinder rebreather, which he is very proficient at diving in caves. And that'll lead into a lot of the conversation today because we're going to talk about KISS. We're going to talk about diving. We're going to talk about cave diving.
That's right.
And protocols and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. I mean, if it gets a little bit noisy, by the way, I just wanted to mention that is because we're recording, from the resort, essentially. So we don't know what's going to happen. But it is true. Today's episode is about cave diving. We've been meaning to talk about this for a while, but I was kind of waiting for this trip because I knew there were going to be world-class cave divers here. And I wanted to have a variety of stories and opinions. And plus, we were going to do some cave diving in Mexico, too, and I wanted to see how that was because I had never done it. I know that some of you guys have done that before.
That was cave diving, right?
It was interesting.
Because these two guys, it's cave diving. I call it cave diving.
It was entertaining. It was entertaining.
Can I add an ish to the cave? It was entertaining. We'll talk about that.
We will talk about that. But before we get started, Bryan, since you're first time on the show, can you talk about what is it that you do? When do you start diving, and especially cave diving?
I started actually diving before the turn of the century, so 1999, and got my start. So I've been about 21 years and been cave diving for 16 years. And it's been a real passion for my wife, Vicki, and myself to go cave diving. In fact, has been so much of a passion, we decided to move to High Springs, Florida, to be in cave country. Cave diving capital of the world.
From Southern California.
From Southern California, yeah.
Can you tell our listeners, a lot of them don't know, seriously, where is High Springs and why is it the cave capital of the world? I know we know things that you think everybody knows, but I never even heard of it till I started cave diving.
And you were born and raised in Florida.
I thought Fort Lauderdale and Broward County was Florida, and I realized it's slightly different than High Springs.
I had to drive him to the real parts of Florida to show him what real Florida looked like. He had no clue.
Doug introduced me to cave diving, and I'm like, wow, this is Florida too. No, seriously, why is that the cave capital
High
of
Springs
the world?
is actually, that's where high tech meets redneck. So that's one of the best things about the area. We're right outside of Gainesville. So University of Florida is located there, and so we have all the amenities associated with a small city. And yet High Springs is a town of about 6,000 people, and it has a number of springs in the area. Florida is known to have over 900 springs of freshwater springs.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's like spaghetti under there. And
why do we always dive the same three?
But
and when I say,
Bryan doesn't.
It's the world capital of cave diving, I'm sure there's going to be some people from Mexico that'll be ringing our bell saying, hey, no, it's us. Because in the Yucatan, obviously, it's
But I'm more interested in, yes, it has a lot of caves, but I think what's so amazing that people may not realize is how many of our cave procedures and gear were sort of invented right there. Isn't that true? A lot of the cave procedures that we use now, and even the cave gear and the lights and the facts that we use line and reels, wasn't a lot of the guys living right there that
absolutely
did it by not doing it right and then
surviving and coming up with protocols to make it safer.
Starting with Chuck Exley is probably the most well known for that, and blueprint for survival.
Exactly.
So this is really cave country. Listeners that aren't familiar with cave diving, these guys literally invented the procedures, and they are very strict, incredibly well thought out protocols, all developed right there in High Springs, Florida, where you're living now. And that's incredible. And some of those guys are still there, by the way.
And Bryan had mentioned the Blueprint for Survival, which is kind of the handbook of cave diving. And what happened was back in the 60s, I'm assuming, probably?
60s and 70s.
60s and 70s. When cave diving kind of started, there was a lot of deaths. And the cave divers at the time kind of got together and said, hey, the government's going to shut us down if this keeps happening. So Sheck Exley, who was a math teacher, was kind of an analytic guy, took and evaluated all of the cave fatalities that he could find and looked for common denominators, and that's where they came up with the 5 rules of cave diving.
So that brings up a question I was saving for the show. I didn't want to tell you guys I was going to ask it, but I've been wanting to ask you guys. For cave divers that follow these 5 rules of cave diving, do you think cave diving is safe, or are we all crazy for cave diving? Because that's the big elephant in the room every time I say I'm a cave diver. Oh, you're crazy. You're
Suicidal.
out of your mind. It's and Gus and I talk about this. It's so deadly. But what if you're trained and you follow these rules? What do you guys think? Is it safe?
Well, I would say compared to what?
I would say in general, as an activity that's something that we enjoy doing, if we follow these rules, are these rules such that it is relatively safe if you're following the protocols of cave diving? And maybe you want to describe what those 5 rules are if you want to add clarification to that, because I want our listeners to understand that we're not going into caves and never been in them before, and we're just swimming around and hoping to find our way out.
I think it's like lots of activities. What you're trying to do is mitigate the risk, right? So it's like saying, is rock climbing dangerous? Is hang gliding dangerous?
Skydiving.
Sure, skydiving. They're all more dangerous than us sitting here by the pool in Cozumel. But the question is, how can you mitigate that risk? The 5 rules of cave diving do a very good job of mitigating risk. They don't eliminate risk by any stretch of imagination. But up until a few years ago, when people have been really, really pushing things, I mean, I think there had only been, a single death where someone didn't break one of those 5 rules. That's changed now.
That's amazing.
So
right
I mean,
there.
within the first decade or two of cave diving, to things with rebreathers and really pushing long distances, there had only been a very, very, very small number of people who had died. They'd not broken one of those rules. So if you follow those 5 rules, it should be at I wouldn't say at no risk, but it should be at an acceptable risk for most people's risk tolerance that are scuba divers.
But that's incredibly important,
right?
That they've always been able to point back to one of those 5 rules.
Unless you have a medical issue.
Okay.
But that can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
But the difference being, of course, if you have a medical issue in the open water, you potentially can go to the surface. If you have a medical issue playing golf, you can stop playing golf. And also, if you drop dead on the 17th fairway, they don't consider that a golfing death. If you have the same event in 60 feet of water, it's a scuba diving death. If you have it in a cave, it's clearly going to be defined as a cave diving death. So there's the health issues and the medical side of things as well. But in general, I think if you are able to follow those rules, you should be able to mitigate most of the issues.
Okay, we got to ask. We got to talk about what are the 5 rules of cave diving. Because I want our listeners, I know them in my head, but...
You have an acronym you're not going to mention on the air.
2 girls all day long.
Okay,
is
the
acronym.
That
no,
is the
I'm
acronym.
just saying. I didn't make that up. I
was
was
that
told
in a book
that.
or?
I said
that
quick.
was.
I would know. That's not my acronym. By the way, Woody on Dive Talk. I
2 girls all day long. That's
what I was told. It's bad, but that's the one I remembered.
Which is training.
T is training. So the training. Let's just talk about each one because it's going to lead into the conversation. I have been diving myself for a very long time. I'm 56 years old. I started diving at 11. I have never seen training like cave dive training. It's almost like an entire separate realm of training above all other training that I've ever done. How was your training experience, Bryan, in cave diving versus all the other training you've done?
Cave diving definitely set the bar. I think both my wife and I had become dive masters, and it's like, it was really hard to become a dive master and pass a dive master course. Yeah. And then we went cave diving, and it's like, that was a walk in the park. That was nothing. And
it's a joke.
Yes.
Compared to cave diving.
Yeah. I mean, in the training, we force ourselves to do everything we can to possibly simulate ways to die all the wrong things to do inside of a cave. Lose the line. Lose your lights. Because, by the way, everybody who isn't familiar with cave diving, the definition of a cave is when you get into the zone where there's no light. And I mean zero light, right? So we simulate all these things, how to get your buddy out, how to tow your buddy, gas planning, et cetera, et cetera. So the training is significant. Okay, what's the next one? Because I just touched on it. This is a biggie, the G. What's the G in the 5? Oh, we got some side conversation going on over here. Hold on. Are you guys all right over there?
Guideline.
Doug, are you able to talk about the guideline, or are you going to do something quickly?
Gus has asked me to do something quickly, which hopefully will be a special guest here in just a moment.
Surprise guest.
Okay, we may have a surprise guest. All right. Gus.
Well,
guideline is the second rule of cave diving. What are we talking about?
Well, it's simply we always have a line to the outside, essentially, till we're out. We never go into the cave without a guideline or a line, basically, and we're always able to follow that line all the way to the exit.
Now, in general, Bryan, these guidelines are in Florida. How are they maintained? Because if we cannot ever dive without a line, what if I'm swimming through and the line is broken? What's going on in Florida to make sure those lines are good? And what kind of line is it? I mean, is it like,
well, there's different agencies and different groups of people actually monitor the lines within the caves and reposition them if they need to be repositioned, or replace them when they need to be replaced, mark them appropriately. They're marked. Many of the caves in Florida are what you might call tourist caves, with line arrows pointing the way out every 100 feet. And I think that's one of the things to consider is, are we used to diving tourist caves, which I've done most of my cave diving life is just a tourist cave. So I consider myself a cave tourist.
The tourist caves are caves that are already mapped out, already have lines, et cetera, right? That's what we're talking about.
And then you just have to run a line from the outside of the cave, right, through the cavern zone to the main line.
So we're not discovering
so you have a
new
run
cave.
line.
We're not that kind of cave diver.
Not in the tourist cave.
Okay. So we're tourists.
explorers.
Would you say we're, for the most part, not the special guest that's coming, but the 4 of us are tourist cave divers?
I would say the 3 of us are. I wouldn't speak for Bryan.
Okay. You may not be. So tell us what you do when you're not doing recreational tourist cave diving. Then what's that difference?
Because that was too easy for Bryan, I guess.
I mean, I haven't done that.
Exploring leads, looking for different places to go that don't have line, and surveying and mapping.
But you're still on a line. So what are you doing?
Well, like the one we did a couple days ago, you were on a line, but you weren't sure which line was the line we were supposed to be on. Was it the piece of twine that was run out and laying all over the floor through the mud that crisscrossed the one that was actually tied to things?
And it broke?
Or, was it something that is actually placed in there specifically marking distance?
Or what someone like
depth?
Bryan may do is take some place to say, like, as an example, Ginny. But there's places of Ginny that haven't been completely explored.
Really?
So you could tie off a place and say, no one's gone in this general area, so I'm going to go see if I can find another
Find another lead.
Another lead and push it. And then come back to the regular tourist cave or whatever. You can do the same thing in Little River. You can do the same thing in Peacock. You can do, Eagle's Nest, whatever.
So, but if you're on a line, that doesn't seem that much more dangerous. What's the increased risk there? If you're exploring a new cave, you're tied off onto a line, so you can just reel yourself back to the main line. But what about that is so dangerous? Why don't we all want to go do that?
Well, you don't know. You're going somewhere potentially where no one has been, so you don't know what the risk of collapse is. You don't know what the risk is of getting through a restriction and being unable to get back to the other side of the restriction based on how it's designed. If you've got like a lobster trap or a crab trap type design, so you can go easily one direction, but not so easily on the way out, that's concerning. So all those carry with them a lot of increased risks.
A huge amount of additional risk.
And lots of times the reason no one's been there before is because they're very small and very tight, and people have gotten to that specific spot and said, I'm not willing to go any farther.
All right, so this is the perfect moment, that question, is the perfect moment to introduce our special guest for the show, Mike Young. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, why are you special, Mike? Why are you here?
Why are you special? I'm special for many reasons.
Yeah, why are you here? For me, like, it's even hard to answer because there's so many sides to this. Obviously, you are the owner of Kiss Rebreathers, which we all dive. We've all been diving for a week now in Cozumel, but also, like, I know we became Facebook friends like within the last year or whatever when I got my rebreather, but I just keep seeing these memories popping up from you being in, like, the craziest caves, like years and years and years ago. And I'm like, why are you doing this? So talk a little bit about yourself.
Background, all that sort of thing.
Background and all that, and then we're going to get into even more specific questions.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been cave diving now for probably a little over 20 years. And back when I got started, they had a pretty good education system going and the training system. But I was not real privileged to that because I live in the Midwest, and there's not a lot of cave diving there. So after my initial training, most of the rest of it we had to learn on our own. And we had a little group of people that did that. The problem was we didn't have a lot of caves, so we had to go find them. And so we learned how to explore caves because that was all we had available.
So you
okay,
wait.
Yeah.
So you were doing cave exploration to learn how to cave dive.
I went through the basics of cave diving with an instructor. Okay, but to gain the experience, we started exploring caves.
So rather than finishing your training, let's say at Ginny Springs, Peacock, Little River, rather than kind of cutting your teeth by going back to those places that have been well mapped and gaining experience, you initially just said, okay, I've got my cave training, now I'm going to gain my experience by exploring brand new cave.
Basically, yes. And
so
most of the caves that we had available to us were small, muddy, nasty, but that's all we had. So guess what? That's what we dove.
Okay.
So, but we were very progressive about it. We would go in and explore to our comfort level. We would come back out, and we would, the next time we would go in and we would go a little further and we'd see what's there and come back out. I mean, some of the caves, new exploration might have only been like 50 feet. We put line, an extra 50 feet, and we was like, okay, we got another problem. We come back out, we'll talk about it, solve it, go try again.
By the way, were you always doing that on Rebreather right from the beginning?
No, in the beginning I was doing open circuit.
Okay, but then how'd you get introduced to Rebreathers, and then what happened from there?
I was reading about Rebreathers. We didn't have the internet back then like we do now. But like Advanced Diver Magazine, a few of them had stuff on rebreathers. And I really liked the concept of a rebreather, but I still couldn't get over the don't take any gas below its MOD. Mm-hmm. And so putting 100% oxygen on you and being able to inject it at 300 feet sounded ludicrous to me. So I thought there's got to be a better way to design one, right? So I built my own rebreathers. And we did that for about 8 to 10 years. And then some people found out about the rebreathers we were using and wanted to market them for us. And that's when I joined the KISS team and started. And I sold them that patent and
that was
started.
That was the original Jim mouthpiece, right?
Yeah, that was the Jim.
And is that why, because you talked about the injection of O2, is that why you've always believed in just a mechanical rebreather and not relying on a computer to inject that oxygen?
Yes, the simpler that you can keep it, theoretically, the safer it'll be.
Yeah. Okay.
So our original rebreathers were a semi-closed rebreather, and it was basically a gas extender. Mm-hmm. And so you would plug in your trimix or your nitrox or whatever mix you would use open circuit at that depth. You would plug that in and breathe that. It just would make it last 10 times longer.
Okay, 2 quick questions. One is, when you find this new cave that you went and explored after being a new cave diver, what do you do with that information? How is that beneficial? What's the purpose of it?
Well, early on, we would go in and map it and survey it, and we would give that information to our local grotto, which is a group of dry cavers, and they filed it in their local reports and things like that.
So you took a compass and you would count the feet and say that was this many feet in this direction and this
Well,
many
it depends
feet.
on how complicated of a survey they want. I mean, there's different grades of survey. You can have just a simple line plot, or you can keep expanding it, and you can go all the way up to like a grade 5 survey, which is like almost drawing every rock, on the map. It depends on what the people would like to get out of it. Sometimes the landowners would say, hey, we want you to dive our cave here, but we want to see where it's going, where it's coming from. And so we would do simple line plots. If the grotto brought us in to dive a sump, which is where you're in a dry cave for a while, and then it comes to water, and you dive through the water and come back to dry cave again, they want really good survey because they want really accurate maps, and they want to try to find another way, to continue the cave. And so they would like to have better maps. And so it all depended on who we were doing it for. And then later on, when I started getting invited on expeditions and things, we had to go along with the parameters that they wanted, So.
Okay, so that's a whole nother skill in itself with surveying, but you did discover rebreathers, which brings up the third rule of cave diving. That's what we're doing, by the way. The conversation of this show is flowing through the 5 rules of cave diving. The third one is
there's
A.
Rules.
Okay, there's A. The third one is A.
We've done we've done training and guidelines. We're up to air.
Because,
Air?
So
Okay.
you're on a rebreather. You've got all the. I mean, how do we plan? Why is there still a very significant rule related to air? I could tell you, well, I have 5 hours worth of scrubber life, so I should be able to go 2.5 hours in.
Even
Where's
with
air come into play?
even with rebreathers, as reliable as they are, you have to figure that any piece of equipment you have on is going to fail you at any given time, no matter what. Even your open circuit equipment. So you have to plan for that contingency. So if your rebreather fails you at the farthest point of your penetration, you have to have enough resources to get out. You have to have more than enough, because what if one of your first stages fails you also? So
that brings up the whole conversation that we started with. These rules really do mitigate the activity of cave diving in terms of a risk significantly. And I'm wanting our listeners to hear, because I think there's a big myth out there. We were talking about this at the beginning of the show. Gus and I talk about it every time a lot to each other, that if you say, oh, I'm a cave diver, most people immediately say you're out of your mind, you're crazy. But there's a big lack of knowledge of what really using proper protocol does to make it. There's a risk, but it certainly has been mitigated. Because what you just said was huge. We take enough air as if we lost air at the absolute worst possible part in our planning.
Right.
So follow that plan, and that's a pretty big mitigator.
And most all of the tragedies and fatalities that have happened occurred because somebody did something wrong.
Right. That's what we were discussing that before.
That's
Almost always it's been someone's broken one of those 5 rules.
Is very
Barring
rarely.
a medical issue
Or
the
cave collapse.
one cave collapse that happened 40 years ago.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that people, when you tell people you're a cave diver, they say, well, that's crazy. It's suicidal. It's so dangerous. But then there's the other side of it, who are the dive pros that are not cave divers that say, but I'm an instructor. I'm a dive master. I'm a whatever.
And that gets a lot of them killed.
Correct.
There are a lot of fatalities of people thinking that they are trained well enough in their environment that they can go into another environment, and they're not.
Isn't it
And
interesting?
that's why it's on the NSS CDS signs. Even instructors have died in caves just like this.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and even in your cave training, there are enormous different environments. And if your training is typically, say, Jenny Springs, that's a specific environment. And that does not necessarily qualify you to come out to one of these cenotes that are just really nasty and you can't see anything for the first 400 or 500 feet. And then you get into the good cave, So completely different environment that unless you're trained for that environment, you should even avoid that.
Just like the open water divers, where they say, when you finish your open water class, you're now certified to dive in the environment you were trained in.
Exactly.
Right? If you train in the Caribbean for your open water class, you probably shouldn't go dive,
Ice diving.
or you shouldn't go dive in really horrible cold water, poor visibility, swift currents, because that's not what your experience level is. And it's the same thing in cave diving. You don't want to start in a nice crystal clear place and then move to something really, really nasty, though that's exactly how you did your cave diving.
Yeah,
but that was out of necessity.
But do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, well, we're not Mike Young. Not many of us are. Okay, so that's the first three. As if that's not enough, the next one is D, depth. And that one really applies to any type of diving.
Right. That originally, though, came about because at the time cave diving started, all we had was air. There wasn't nitrox. So that was a narcosis issue. You didn't want to be in a cave environment where obviously being oriented, being task loaded, and knowing kind of where you were is very, very important. And then have narcosis on top of that could be a real problem. So that's where that originally came from.
So,
But it still applies.
But it still applies.
It does. I mean, there's people that do things they shouldn't do, and you know, when you're narked out, you're not going to make good choices.
You know, it's interesting too. I think when I first started cave diving, judging depth was very difficult because all the walls are around you, right? And you're thinking,
true.
oh
I
my
was gonna
gosh,
say that,
you know,
Bryan.
it can't be more than 10 feet deep,
I know.
right? And you look at your gauge and you're like, oh crap, I'm at 100 feet.
It's
But
true.
yet these walls are just all around me. So watching your depth is critical.
I'm not kidding you. I was just about to say what he was saying. And I remember that for myself, right? I'm a relatively new cave diver. I've got like 44, I think, that outside of training. By the way, I love it and I'm highly addicted. But I remember going like, I feel like I'm at like 20 or 30 feet the whole time because for those that haven't cave dive, you're surrounded in like a tunnel the whole time. So it's very hard to tell that you're going down. You really got to monitor your instruments and computers.
Well,
So-
the other issue also to that point is if you're cave diving, you don't have the option of going shallower if the cave goes deeper. You either go deeper
Yes.
or you turn around, and people have to have the training and understanding that if you're good at 130, you're not good at 200, and you're going along and the cave drops, you need to turn around because going shallower through that section isn't an option unless you've got a jackhammer with you.
and you may not be able to turn around.
And you can't do that. That's cave conservation.
Exactly.
But that's a good point. You may not be able to turn around at any particular point that you want. I mean, there
Right.
have been sections where I know, like, pretty sure I wouldn't have been able to turn around. Maybe you have to go back a little or somehow get pushed back a little. So, yeah. Okay. L.
Lights.
It's cave black. I never forget when they told me when you go in, it's the weirdest kind of darkness. Your eyeballs are wide open. It's so dark. I remember I actually said, no, I think I am seeing like something. And they're like, no, those are like imprints in your brain, Woody. And I have a weird brain anyway, but it's
Well,
so weird. It's such a distortion.
It is interesting because, I mean, people ask and I say it's 0.0. How much light is there? 0.0. There's none. It is black. And your eyes, if you keep them open, they are in fact searching for light, right? And so they talk about people going crazy in a 0.0 light environment
Disorienting.
because your brain is trying to receive these messages that just aren't coming through. So
Yeah, and there's not many times in our life where we're really in zero light. I mean, certainly shutting your eyes isn't the case. You're
Right.
not
So
in
the
zero
actual
light.
rule for the lights, like you mentioned,
Yes,
is
yeah,
to have
let's
a
finish
minimum
it.
of 3 lights.
Yeah.
And the rationale being for anybody who's been in some of the Florida caverns, the idea is or night diving for that matter, is to have a primary and a backup. Okay, because you can go to the surface if you're a night dive and see the moon, or if you're in a cavern, you've got the sun, and that's your third light. If you're in a cave, you have no third light, so you have your primary light and a minimum of 2 backups in case something fails.
Okay.
And lights are a lot more reliable than they were 20 years ago when Mike was started, or when Bryan started cave diving and so forth. They're much more reliable now, but still that rule applies.
I actually like to take 4 because then you still have 3 and you don't have to
Right.
end your dive. Because I guess if you have 3 and you lose 1, you
turn
really
it.
should turn the dive.
And
I don't want to turn it.
depending on the light you're taking,
Yeah.
Well,
are
we-
you
yeah,
taking 2
we take two
primaries and 2
primaries.
backups?
Yeah, we do 2 primaries and 2 backups.
yeah.
So then that would make sense.
I do think that the whole 3 lights thing, we take 4, but I do think that also applies to things like dropping it off, and I think that's why in training we cover that. If you drop it, like turn it on before you take it off your D-ring, so if it falls, you at least
can find it.
have a chance, because some of them have like whatever many inches thick,
Silt.
the silt, and if it goes in there, you probably won't see it even on. But the fact that you learn all of that during training, and that's why the class is so long. It's like 8 days long, right? Compared to a open water class that you can knock out in 3 days.
8 very intense days. Okay, so I know everybody out there a lot of people out there are saying, well, why then do you guys love cave diving so much? So let's just one time go around the room.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
Okay,
I think I have a different reason.
I want
than
all
everyone.
of you guys to answer. I'll go last. Why?
Why don't you let Mike go last?
Okay, Mike, you go
'Cause
last.
He may have the best stories.
Brian, you moved your life to High Spring, Florida, and a lot of it, if not all of it, had to do with the fact that you could be right next to the caves. Why do you love cave diving so much?
I think we like just finding out what's around the next corner. It's why do you take a Sunday drive, right? You go and you look and see what's around the next corner, and that's just part of exploration, I think, is how can we find something new to us or something unique. And it's sometimes difficult, you're going along and everything's going well and you're thinking, hey, this is good. Oh, I see we've reached our planned turn time. Right, we're 50 minutes in, and we know we got to come out, and we got some deco obligation. What? Well, no, we can't. We have to have the discipline to say, let's plan to go around the next corner next time.
And, I just want to add how incredible caves are to hone your skills as a diver. Like, they take you to a higher level.
Answer. That's taking my answer to.
What I was going to say is... No, hold on.
No, I was going to say that, but I knew Gus was going to say
Gus just took 2 of our answers.
No, what I was going to say is that it's unbelievable how perfect Bryan is in the caves.
Beautiful to watch.
It's like a submarine. Like, you can't... It's just perfection, trim, up, down, just... perfect, right? When I'm like banging into the ceiling.
Which is kind of funny.
We were going through Devil's Throat, and Mike was scooting underneath all of us to turn around and get photos, and no one even knew he was there.
Oh, yeah.
That was very impressive.
He
was like this. There's not that much room, and I'm swimming along, and all of a sudden Mike is below me, coming around and getting photos.
No, he's stealth under there. I watch Mike. I'm like, there he is. He's stealth.
In this trip, just a funny story about Mike. We were diving, and Mike goes into this hole that I knew there's no exit. Like, there's just no chance. He goes into this hole, and I'm swimming by him, and I'm like, oh, it was nice diving with Mike. He's dead back there. And then he, at the same time as I'm passing by him, he starts backing out, doing the back, the kicking.
Back kick.
And he was faster than me going forward. I have never seen anyone go
I do go backwards a lot.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he's just
just out of there like a
when
rocket.
you explore the way Mike explores, you spend a lot of time backing up.
So, Doug, Doug, by the way, trained me all up through rebreather diving. He's one of my dive mentors. And he would constantly hear me say, I just love the pretty fish in the ocean or whatever. And now every time I text him, it's, when are we going cave diving again? Well, why do you love it so much?
Okay. I was kind of in the same boat. I started recreational diving in 1974, and basically had always sworn that I was never going to cave dive, and I had no interest. And what actually happened with me is I started doing a lot of training of rebreather divers, and a lot of people were cave certified that were crossing over to rebreathers. And what amazed me was what you just mentioned. The cave divers who were crossing over to dive now rebreathers were some of the most technically the best divers I'd ever seen. So I got into cave diving really just to hone skills. And then once I started doing that, I started getting an appreciation just for me, a lot of the technical aspect of it, of completing it well, not stirring things up, jumps correctly, all that sort of thing from a technical standpoint. And then I started seeing some pictures of places that you and I have been to. And my next goal was to get to the level of rebreather cave diving that Mike would be willing to take me to the Bahamas to go cave dive with him and Brian Kaycook. Yeah. So that was my next goal. So that happened a few years ago. So that was kind of how my story goes.
Oh, that's me, I guess.
Now you're up.
Yeah, so here's your second answer, Gus.
Well, my first answer. I think it's gonna be different than everyone. You know, when I was learning how to fly planes, one of the things that I never felt was that thing that it's like, oh, you feel free, that you're in the air like a bird and fly. No, I never felt that. I always felt like I was operating a machine that is flying. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the fact that I'm operating this thing and making it fly level or up or down or however I want by operating it. And I think when I'm diving in caves, I feel the same way. I enjoy the fact that I have these 2 massive tanks and all this other gear, essentially, that I have to manage and use in order to dive safely through the cave. I don't really find the caves pretty. I don't go in and I'm like...
You haven't been to the right caves.
Yeah, okay, I haven't been to the right cave.
Yeah, they are...
Right, but...
You need a new mask.
Like, I don't go into Little River or Peacock or whatever and be like, oh my God, how beautiful. Like, they're cool, but it's not a beauty thing. And maybe I need to go to the Avocados and, see the crystal caves. But the caves that we dive, or that I've dove in, they're just rock. Like, there's nothing beautiful about them. But the skills and the fact that I'm operating all of this gear in order to make it happen safely is what attracts me to cave diving.
So you would never fly your plane over the Grand Canyon?
I mean, that sounds cool.
Yeah. Or because I look at a lot of caves and I look, hey, this is like going to Bryce Canyon or someplace like that, and just all the geology and all the formations and things like that you would never see if you didn't take up this hobby.
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying they're not pretty. All I'm saying is that's not why I cave dive. It's not because I go in there and be marveled at the rocks. No, I'm not. I actually think about funny things to do. And I told you that I think it's hilarious if somebody went at Peacock and put one of those signs that says free hugs on the tunnel to waterhole. Just like that's the stuff that I think about when I'm cave diving. It's like, oh my God, that tunnel looks so creepy. Somebody should put a sign that says free hugs.
Maybe think more about trim.
Exactly. Think more about skills. Go ahead, Woody.
Well, all right, I'm a licensed pilot as well, and I do get that feeling of flying like a bird. And let me tell you, the reason I love cave diving is that I feel so privileged that I actually learned these incredibly hard. It was not easy for me. My instructor was Bryan Buescher, and I got to tell you, when I first started, the first day, I think he was like, I don't know, dude. I'm diving like I'm in the ocean. And now I got to see some of the most beautiful things my eyeballs have ever seen. No exaggeration. I mean, I cried. Even the Florida caves to me are magnificent.
By the way, I was there. He did cry.
When I got to Fanghorn Forest, I cried in my mask. He pointed at the sign. He high-fived me like you earned the right to be here. And then when my eyes saw what I was looking at, for me, it was spiritual. I believed at that moment I was seeing something that whatever your higher power is only will allow a few very, very privileged people to see, because we have the respect for that creation. This is not a religious show, but I get that feeling when I'm in Little River, when I'm in Peacock, when I'm in Jenny. I mean, I was born and raised in Florida. That whole state is spaghetti under there of where I was living. It's incredibly beautiful. Some of those formations and openings when you're coming into Peacock, or the keyhole, I mean, I just stop sometimes and I'm like, I can't really describe it to non-cave divers. My words never do it justice. I only can share that with the other privileged group that has seen it, and it's a special bond we have. It is. When you are with other cave divers, it feels like a very close bond, because we've seen things that could be viewed as the most magnificent part of the world. And for some reason, we were the privileged ones that were trained and allowed to be able to see that. So that's why I can't wait to get back under there.
You brought up the spiritual part of it, and that was one thing that my wife and I talk about all the time, is that it's hard to not be in the moment when you're in the cave. And you think about,
so true,
presence,
Bryan.
and being present, and meditation, and things of that nature. And, so many times in life we're thinking about what happened yesterday, or what's happening tomorrow, or what's happening a month from now. And for us, when we're in a cave, it's now, this moment, exactly right now.
Totally agree.
Totally agree with that.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear Mike.
All
Mike,
right.
why do you love cave diving?
Well, it's a combination of things. Like Gus said, it's a control thing. And actually, at one of the NSS conventions, they did a little survey, and out of all the people in the room, they were saying, okay, have you ever gone skydiving? Because cave diving's dangerous and skydiving's dangerous, and it's an adrenaline thing, you know. Almost nobody had been skydiving. But they asked, how many people here are pilots? And over 50% of the people said they were, raised their hand, they were pilots. And so it's the same kind of thing. Pilots, it's a mindset. And pilots, they like to follow their checklist. They like to be in control of the situation. Nothing's going to go wrong as long as we do everything we're supposed to do exactly the way we're supposed to do it. And then when you do that, the sense of achievement is but like Woody said also, I was in Notre Dame Cathedral one time, and you're sitting there with all of this history and the atmosphere, the reverence, for this place being a spiritual place, and you get that when you're in a cave too. The history is there. I mean, it's older than time. I mean, these caves have been there for so long. Some of these stalactites are 50, 60 feet long, and it's like 10,000 years per inch. You're like,
that's unbelievable.
And so then for me, it's the aspect that I will get to see things that nobody has seen before.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody. And then there's things that I've seen that nobody will see besides me. There's
Amazing.
places that nobody will go back, And so.
And isn't it amazing that all that beauty that you're talking about right now is just back sitting there in utter, total darkness. And when we go by it, we're so in the moment. We think we're such a big part of its existence, and we're just a little blip of sand that drifted by it.
We are so
speck.
blessed to just pass through.
Like a nothing speck.
Yeah.
It's funny that you
So
mentioned
cool.
that there are places that you've been that no one will be there again, because that's how I feel about that Mexican cave that we went to, at least in one of the tunnels that we went, because the line snapped, and immediately, like, we just looked at it. I think I snapped it with a flashlight. Like I shined the flashlight on it, and it broke, and the line just went into like this tunnel, and I'm glad we were the first team in, because whoever would have been in that tunnel we would be searching for them still.
That's why you repair the line.
That's why you repair the line, and you learn that on the cave, except here we didn't.
Protocol. Yeah.
But it is interesting. I want you guys to talk about, as we wrap up the show, I wanted to close it with funny stories, and I think that the cave dive here in Mexico was kind of funny in that regard, which is, for me, for example, with 25 whatever cave dives, all in Florida pretty much, coming here and seeing the differences, like you mentioned, it was a piece of twine instead of this thick, gold line that we have in Florida. I want you guys to talk about what you thought about it as we were.
Okay, first thing we need to make sure, for your listeners, is we weren't talking about the cenotes over on the mainland.
No.
Because that is different. That's freshwater lines, good visibility. This was a sea cave here in Cozumel, so that's got a whole bunch of different issues to it. So you've got all the growth on the line, so it's encrusted, making it harder to see. It's got
tidal issues.
It makes the line weaker. You've got tidal issues because things can siphon based on high tide, low tide.
And the hydrogen sulfide that eats the line.
And the hydrogen sulfide eats the line. And you've got halic lines. And the halic line just happens to be right where the line happens to be, that's covered with stuff and buried in the sand, so you can't see squat. And there's not a line committee like there is in Florida. So there's not people who are monitoring the lines. And the lines don't have a permanent gold line. They don't have directional arrows. They don't have jumps. They just have a bunch of T's. So the navigation part of things is challenging and requires good training. Going back to Mike's point, which is that, as you noticed, having done all of your cave diving in Florida does not necessarily prepare you to do a silty, nasty sea cave in Cozumel.
But I think we should put it in perspective. It's important we do this, because I don't want our listeners to think that we're like cowboys and doing stuff that are not that we shouldn't be. We were with a guide that was very familiar with that cave.
For sure.
I would not go into that cave like Doug. If it was just you and I, we came here.
No.
You and I are not going to go into that cave by ourselves because we heard about it, right? We were guided through that cave, and Mike was there as well. This is extreme experience that guided us through this type of cave.
But even when guided, you need to make sure you get all of your protocols in place and all that sort of thing.
Of course,
for safety.
but I'm just saying that was an added.
Right.
That's the kind of cave divers that I would say we are. Maybe not so much Bryan and Mike, but certainly I'll speak for myself. I would not have gone in there if it wasn't for the experience level of Mike and Jose and so forth.
Yep, for sure. But it was an interesting experience, especially the hollow climb. Like I was hoping that was like a like a couple inch layer, and then I would be able to see again. But as soon as you go into that, it's zero vis. It's like
a blur.
What is going on?
And then after you stir your feet around and stir it up for the second and third person, then
by the time you're
a bigger blur
when
for
you're
them.
the fourth person in the team, as I was, there's no
Zero.
visibility.
There's
There's no defined halocline at that point.
It's like swimming through a bottle of triple sec.
Yeah. The place where we turn around, I was second in the team, and our guide went in and I had zero vis already. Like going in, I was second and I had zero vis because it was this tight tunnel that no matter how you kick, the silt was just gonna go. And at that point, I'm like, if you guys want to go, because I knew going in, and I learned my lesson going to Woody's room. If going in you have zero vis, and I'm the second one, coming out is gonna be
Well, we should actually define zero vis. Right. You guys had good vis.
You had good vis.
Right, sure.
Yeah, that's not zero. That's true. I can make it worse.
Yeah.
Well,
you could see your gauges.
Yeah.
You knew you had a light on.
Maybe my nerd, yes.
Yeah.
Somewhat see our gauges. But I do think the theme of this show, I really hope our listeners walk away understanding that we're cave divers, but we follow stricter protocols than any other form of diving that I've ever done. Ever. It's not even, and we never violate any of those protocols.
Right.
So, as Doug, you worded it perfectly, there's risk. There's risks in everything, but we really go a very long way to try to mitigate those risks as much as possible.
Exactly.
That's important.
And even on the level of Mike, who's obviously world class cave explorer, is still following all those rules all the time. So yes, what he's doing is more dangerous than recreational kind of cave diving, but at the same time, he's more meticulous than anybody as far as the safety protocols, because he's got a wife and family he wants to come home to him just like everybody else does.
It's not a crazy wild west thing is what I'm saying.
No.
But I thought we were telling funny stories, and since we're going to do that,
Okay, here we go.
let me tell the funny story.
All right. Okay. Good.
So, our group went in a different entrance than you guys did. So, when we were coming out, I saw your lights over at the other one. So, I swam around there to meet you. And I saw this huge lobster, and he was backing his way into the cave casually, not knowing there's anyone behind him. So I tickled him a little bit, and he jumped and scooted back as fast as he could and ran straight into Gus.
And Gus had no idea what hit him.
Yes.
And I laughed so hard my mask flooded.
Yes.
Yeah, I just
And then
got
he
hit
my
in the
hand.
chest.
He
Like,
kept
what
after
the
he bounced off a Gus.
was that?
Like, right through my hand. I'm like, whoa.
The poor lobster didn't even know what was going on. All of a sudden, there's people all around in the back of his hole.
He was big as well.
It's a very big lobster. Exactly.
Yeah, he was. He's 4 or 5 pounds.
Oh man, it was that was pretty funny.
So now you just need a chest protector next time
The
you
other
go
funny
there.
one, just to talk about Mike's ability, since here, I don't want to embarrass him, but when I went to Abaco with Mike and with Bryan Cakelet, Bryan had told me, you have to dive these caves side mount, period. You can't get in without being side mount. So he has his sidekick, side mount rebreather. I went in my sidewinder that Mike designed. So we get to one restriction, and Bryan has to help me, even on the sidewinder, figure out how the heck I'm going to get through this little area. So he and Mike finally get me through this area on side mount, only for me to turn around and Mike just swam through it on back mount. His back mount's spirit rebreather. So yes, you have to be in side mount to dive Abaco, unless you're Mike Young.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And that's funny because I remember that story, and then Mike said that because he's diving the sidewinder here on the trip, and I'm like, why are you diving the sidewinder? He's like, oh, because we were supposed to go to a cave that I can only go through on a sidewinder.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay.
Forget that one.
But you got to give a shout out to Brian Kickuck as well. I mean, he's artful to watch in those caves. His precision is unbelievable. He has to protect those caves. The caves in the Abacus, there's so many fragile crystals, and just to watch him is something special, which I did for 11 days, where I would hear him, if I moved a pinky, I would hear, I had a lot of, but it's pretty remarkable.
Here's what I want to wrap the show with and close the show with is anyone listening to this show that says, you know what, that sounds pretty cool. I do want to join that small group of people that are able to go into caves and be safe, but I don't know how to go about it. Maybe you, Doug, who you're a cave instructor.
As is Mike.
You guys talk about if someone wants to get into cave diving, let's say they're just open water. Let's say they're master divers in open circuit, okay? And they say, I want to get to that. What would you recommend the path to be to get there?
The options are, if you're open circuit, you know, most cave divers are still open circuit cave divers. So there are multiple agencies. I think the key is, like with any kind of diving, you want to get the right instructor. So talk to friends, talk to mentors, find out who would be the right instructor fit for you. The pathway with open circuit is kind of cavern intro, which is cavern diving and then just staying on the main line. And you can move up through apprentice and full cave, or you can go the CCR route if you're CCR certified, and then do a CCR cave class. And all of them are long. I mean, like you were saying, it's a week-long class, and I think the last CCR cave class I taught, minimum's 10 hours, but I think we spent 18 hours underwater.
Yeah, for sure. And you did your, Brian, you did your open water cave class, right, first?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Started out with cavern and intro and apprentice and full cave in open circuit.
Okay, and you trained through whom? Who was it?
I was actually through the NACD when they were still viable and around, and Rick McCarr was the instructor, and I have a lot of respect for him and his skills, and we worked our asses off till 2:30 in the morning.
Cave diving, NACD.
Me too.
Yeah, just trying to figure stuff out and trying to get that muscle memory developed so that you can do things without thinking about it because you got other things to think about.
That's awesome. What do you think, Mike? The path?
Well, Doug really summed it up. But personally, I always have a conversation with people first, and like, why do you want to do it? What is attracting you, and what is your end goal? You wanting to go be able to swim in a certain place or do a certain thing, and then I try to recommend an instructor that would fit that, so that they got to their end result that they needed. So.
Right.
I love
There's a variety of different
logical.
agencies out there. I mean, that do technical diving, to do cave diving, but again, all the standards are very, I would say they're the same, but they're very close, very, very similar. So it doesn't necessarily matter if you have an IANTD or a TDI or a maybe GUE is a little bit higher up there, but or NSS CDS. But as long as you have a really excellent instructor for you, where the personalities are the same, you get the goals aligned. Yeah. That's the way to do it.
Another thing is there's people say, I want to learn to cave dive, and there's a lot of instructors that you can do it all in one course, start to finish. That's not really a good thing to do either, because you might get halfway through and decide, this really isn't for me. Mm-hmm. And we call it zero to hero, and doing it all in one shot without having time to develop each skill along the way is not a good way to do it. It's better to do the classes in segments. Do, cavern, and then go cavern diving for a little while and build that skill till it's, muscle memory, till it's automatic, and then go to the next step. And that way, if you do decide, well, this may not be for me, you don't have that huge investment and feel that you have to finish because you already started and you paid for it, for one thing.
Right.
But and I like a mentoring system better myself too, because the more experience you have, the more you're going to retain that memory. And the way to get experience is to mentor with somebody and go diving with them and let them show you the tricks and the easy thing, not just what's in the book, But
I love that. And I think with cave diving and with diving in general, we happen to do a sport or an activity in which you can actually go and learn and dive with the best people in the world. Like you can't do that with basketball or baseball.
You're not going to get LeBron James to teach you to do a jump shot, but you can get Mike Young to teach you to cave dive.
And another thing too is the existing cave divers out there. I've heard people say all the time, well, I won't dive with somebody unless they're at least this level. And that's really the wrong answer too, because what you need to do is you have an obligation to help the next generation come along. And if you're not willing to dive at their level and mentor them and help them along when they need it, then, you have that obligation. Somebody helped you whenever you were getting started. And so you have that obligation. It doesn't matter what level of cave diver you are. There's somebody around who is less skilled than you are and could use a little bit of experience.
I like that.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about imprinting and how somebody learns and how they put that into motion for themselves. And people that go the zero to hero route, they may have learned an incredible amount during that course, but check back with them 4 months later, and maybe they had a gap, and it's not completely imprinted. And it's
you
like,
need to do it.
I'm trying to recreate something or do something
hero,
different.
You need to do it. You need to cave dive a lot afterwards, and
with a variety of people.
With a
variety of
mentor, and not push any limits.
And another thing that I think a lot of people get locked into, and it comes from the open water days. You go open water diving and you've got this instructor and he saved your life, and so he's your instructor. And he may be a mediocre instructor, but in your mind, he's the best instructor in the world because he was your instructor. And so you do your advanced with him, and you do your nitrox with him, and So in my opinion, people should use a variety of instructors, because each instructor is going to teach you different techniques, and they're going to emphasize different areas. And it's not a bad idea to say take cavern with one instructor and then go take your next level with another instructor and get, and then if you're going to go to an environment that's new to you, say you are a Florida diver and you're going to go dive the caves over in Mexico in the Yucatan. They're different. Go spend a day with an instructor and learn what he knows, and get the tips and the tricks from him.
And then use a guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then use a guide over there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
I would want to do that for a couple of years before I would go without a guide.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. Thank you guys so much. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great way to wrap up the 1 year anniversary
Is
of
this
the
the
show.
first show of 2021?
First show of 2021.
What a great way to start Dive Talk.
Great way to start the year. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, and Woody, and hopefully we get to do this again on another amazing topic in the future.
Thanks, guys.
We got to put another one of these trips together. It's been amazing.
Thank you for putting this together. It was a great trip.
Absolutely.
Can we do it next month again? Maybe? No? No? All right.
Yeah, I'll see you guys for the
Woody, you're putting me
lionfish
on the
night.
payroll.
It's a tradition, right?
All right, see you
starts
guys.
with a tradition.
Safe diving, guys.